A little joy and knowledge satisfied this little being tied into a knot and hung on a bulge of its environment. A little curve cut off in measureless space. We see here very clearly, this little life. It's satisfied with just a little joy and just a little knowledge. But it's also a little being that's tied into a knot and it's hung on this bulge of its environment. It's a little curve that's cut off in measureless space. I have to go to the next one now. A little span of life in all vast time. So this is an ephemeral area of the planes of existence, of the kingdoms of the little life. Very, very ephemeral. He says, a thought was there that planned, a will that strove, but for small aims within a narrow scope, wasting unmeasured toil on transient things. Oh, what a line. How we do that ourselves so much. So we have a thought was there in this little mind, little life, We have a will that strove, but what did it strive for? Just small aims within a very narrow scope, wasting unmeasured toil on transient things. Well, we could use the quotation from the Americas, keeping up with the Joneses. It's a pejorative statement that Jones gets something and Smith next door wants to keep up with him and get that something also. And so they waste unmeasured toil on transient things. It knew itself a creature of the mud. It asked no larger law, no loftier aim. It had no inward look, no upward gaze. And then this extraordinary line, a backward scholar on logic's rickety bench. Rickety, of course, is something that's likely to fall or collapse. And the scholar sits on a bench always. But it's logic's rickety bench. And the scholar is even backward. And what does it do? It's indoctrinated by the erring sense. Indoctrinated really means imbued with a biased belief or point of view. If someone is indoctrinated into something, as they do with his children in the war zones, they are definitely indoctrinated by the erring sense. And what does it do? It took appearance for the face of God, for casual lights, the marching of the suns, for heaven, a starry strip of doubtful blue, aspects of being feigned to be the whole. To feign, we fabricate, we invent, we represent something fictitiously. Now, he continues on here after that full stop, and he says, there was a voice of busy interchange, a marketplace of trivial thoughts and acts, a life soon spent, a mind the body's slave. Here seemed the brilliant crown of nature's work. And tiny egos took the world as means to sate a while, dwarf lusts and brief desires. In a death-closed passage, saw life start and end, as though a blind alley were creation's sign, as if for this the soul had coveted birth in the wonderland of a self-creating world and the opportunities of cosmic space. Well, we see this very powerful, that among this voice of busy interchange and this marketplace of trivial thoughts and acts, a life was soon spent. The mind was the body's slave. And yet here seemed the brilliant crown of nature's work. And tiny egos took the world as means to sate a while dwarf lusts and brief desires. To sate is to satisfy a desire fully. Then there's a comma after desire, so he wants us to continue here. In a death-closed passage. So the passage is death-closed. But in that death-closed passage, they saw the start and end of life, as though a blind alley were creation's sign. Well, you know, in America especially, I know they make a lot of these cul-de-sacs, which are actually blind alleys, and you have to come in and go out again. There's no getting out of it any other way. As if for this the soul had coveted birth. To covet is to really want something, to truly want something. In the wonderland of a self-creating world and the opportunities of cosmic space. So they have these opportunities, but it seems to them that creation's sign is like a blind alley. And for what? For this the soul had coveted birth in the wonderland of a self-creating world and the opportunities of cosmic space. Well, he tells us more. He says, this creature, passionate only to survive. So it has no higher aims. It wants only to survive. And we know already that it faces constantly this fuel or this fire growing by its fuel's death. So this creature is passionate. It only wants to survive. But it is fettered to puny thoughts with no wide range. Fettered is always bound, bound around the bound around the legs as an animal, and therefore the movement is restricted. And figuratively, you understand that a restraint is imposed upon it. So puny, of course, of inferior size, strength or significance, weak, fettered to puny thoughts with no wide range, and to the body's needs and pangs and joys, comma, this fire growing by its fuel's death, increased by what it seized and made its own. It gathered and grew and gave itself to none. Only it hoped for greatness in its den, and pleasure and victory in small fields of power, and conquest of life room for self and kin. An animal limited by its feeding space. It knew not the immortal in its house. It had no greater, deeper cause to live. I think that's self-explanatory because we're going to see much more about this being. In limits only, it was powerful. Now, there's a semicolon there because Sri Aurobindo wants to tell us that acute to capture truth for outward use. You know, acute has many, many definitions. It can be shrewd, it can be clever, it can be intense. It could be keen or sharp-witted, penetrant. Excuse me. Its knowledge was the body's instrument. Absorbed in the little works of its prison house, it turned around the same unchanging points, in the same circle of interest and desire, but thought itself the master of its jail. Now here you see we come to the word jail, which Sri Aurobindo has also spelled in other parts of Savitri, Jaol, the old British spelling of jail. Although for action, not for vision made, thought was its apex or its gutter's rim. It saw an image of the external world and saw its surface self, but knew no more. Out of a slow, confused, embroiled self-search. Embroiled is something that's thrown into disorder, entangled. Mind grew to a clarity cut out, precise, a gleam enclosed in a stone ignorance. In this bound thinking's narrow leadership, tied to the soil, inspired by common things, attached to a confined familiar world, amid the multitude of her motive plots, her changing actors, and her million masks, life was a play, monotonously the same. There were no vast perspectives of the spirit, no swift invasions of unknown delight, no golden distances of wide release. This petty state resembled our human days, but fixed to eternity of changeless type. See, we have that possibility of change. So their world, actually a petty state, resembled our human days, but they are fixed to eternity of changeless type. No evolutionary movement there. A moment's movement, doomed to last through time. Now, after that period, he says, existence, bridge-like, spanned the inconscient gulfs. We read in Inconscient last week, I believe. A half-illumined building in a mist, which from a void of form arose to sight and jutted out into a void of soul. Something that juts out is extended beyond its limits, beyond the limits of the main body. It's projected, protruded, jutted out into a void of soul. What else do we have? The true soul in us, Sri Aurobindo says, subliminal, we have said, but the word is misleading, for this presence is not situated below the threshold of waking mind, but rather burns in the temple of the inmost heart, behind the thick screen of an ignorant mind, life, and body. Not subliminal, but behind the veil. This veiled psychic entity is the flame of the Godhead, always alight within us, inextinguishable, even by that dense unconsciousness of any spiritual self within, which obscures our outward nature. It is a flame born out of the divine, and luminous inhabitant of the ignorance grows in it till it is able to turn it towards the knowledge. It is the concealed witness and control, the hidden guide, the daemon of Socrates, the inner light or inner voice of the mystic. It is that which endures and is imperishable in us from birth to birth, untouched by death, decay, or corruption, an indestructible spark of the divine. And this is from the Life Divine. We'll continue to the end of Canto 4, a few more lines. A little light in a great darkness born, life knew not where it went, nor whence it came. Around all floated still the nescient haze. The nescient haze, of course, is the complete self-ignorance. End of Canto 4. Who will read for us today this long passage? Let me have some volunteers.
Narad, may I?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. A little joy and knowledge satisfied, this little being tied into a knot and hung on a bulge of its environment, a little curve cut off in measureless space, a little span of life in all vast time, a thought there that planned, a will that strove, but for small aims within a narrow scope, wasting unmeasured toil on transient things. It knew itself a creature of the mud. It asked no larger law, no loftier aim. It had no inward look, no upward gaze. A backward scholar on logic's rickety bench, indoctrinated by the erring sense. It took appearance for the face of God, for casual lights, the marching of the suns, for heaven, a starry strip of doubtful blue, aspects of being feigned to be the whole. There was a voice of busy interchange, a marketplace of trivial thoughts and acts, a life soon spent, a mind the body's slave. Here seemed the brilliant crown of nature's work, and tiny egos took the world as means to sate awhile dwarf lusts and brief desires. In a death-closed passage saw life start and end, as though a blind alley were creation's sign. As if for this the soul had coveted birth in the wonderland of a self-creating world, and the opportunities of cosmic space. This creature passionate only to survive, fettered to puny thoughts with no wide range, and to the body's needs and pangs and joys, this fire growing by its fuel's death, increased by what it seized and made its own. It gathered and grew and gave itself to none. Only it hoped for greatness in its den, and pleasure and victory in small fields of power, and conquest of life room for self and kin, an animal limited by its feeding space. It knew not the immortal in its house. It had no greater, deeper cause to live. In limits only it was powerful, acute to capture truth for outward use. Its knowledge was the body's instrument. Absorbed in the little works of its prison house, it turned around the same unchanging points, in the same circle of interest and desire, and thought itself the master of its jail. Although for action, not for wisdom made, thought was its apex or its gutter's rim. It saw an image of the external world and saw its surface self, but knew no more. Out of a slow, confused, embroiled self search, mind grew to a clarity cut out, precise, a gleam enclosed in a stone's ignorance. In this bound thinking's narrow leadership, tied to the soil, inspired by common things, attached to a confined familiar world, amid the multitude of her motived plots, her changing actors and her million masks, life was a play monotonously the same. There were no vast perspectives of the spirit, no swift invasions of unknown delight, no golden distances of white lilies. This petty state resembled our human days, but fixed to eternity of changeless type, a moment's movement doomed to last through time. Existence, bridge-like, spanned the inconscient gulfs, a half-illumined building in a mist, which from a void of form arose to sight and jutted out into a void of soul. A little light in a great darkness born, life knew not where it went nor whence it came. Around all floated still the nascent haze.
A very good reading. My only suggestion that you might slow it down just a little bit so the
Sure, thank you.
mantra can come out. A little light in a great darkness born. Life knew not where it went, nor whence it came. All around all floated still the nascent haze. So we see a little light in a great darkness born. Life knew not where it went, nor whence it came. Around all floated still the nascent haze. So if you can remember the mantra of this iambic pentameter and just slow down a little bit, your reading is very, very good.
I'll keep that
Very
in mind.
good.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll keep that in mind.
So we won't go on into Canto 5 tonight, but if there are any questions, please ask them. It's quite clear, the picture that paints for us of these kingdoms of the little light.
It's actually about us, about our lives. I can see it around very much so. Absorbed in the little works of its prison house, it turned around the same unchanging points in the same circle of interest and desire.
It's very human, isn't it?
It is.
And that's why when I asked Radalu, he said, these planes converse with people in the earth planes. And that's how they bring it down. Very, very interesting statement.
Yeah.
So if we go and we just look at the next page, just to get an idea of what we're going to get. It's Canto 5, the Godheads of the Little Life. So it's Book 2, the Book of the Traveler of the Worlds, Canto 5. So we went from the kingdoms of the little life to the Godheads of the little life. And so we're going to learn about them next week in detail, because Sri Aurobindo, we have to remember that every word he put down was so consciously placed. It's not just that he put an and here and a the there. Every word was fixed and came down most likely from the overhead planes. Yes, you wanted to.
Interesting choice of Godheads is a great word of the little life.
Yeah.
The choice is kind of suggesting us that the little life is actually a huge creation.
Yes, and it seems like a paradox that you could have Godheads and a little life.
Mm.
But these Godheads of the little life have also something to give, and we will hear about them next week.
Right.
So I will say good night to you all. Namaste.
Thank you, Narad. Namaste.
If I can,
Namaste. Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you.
yeah, okay, namaste.
Namaste.